Welcome to Four Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's Four Quarter Lives, I talk with Maria Clara Pinheiro, director at Ashoka, the world's largest network of social entrepreneurs. Maria Clara joins us from India to share Ashoka's pioneering work on what they call the new longevity, a powerful reframing of aging as a time of continued contribution, creativity, and social innovation. We explore how a bottom-up global scan of Ashoka's 4,000 changemakers revealed an emergent movement tackling aging-related challenges, from intergenerational disconnection to economic insecurity, often in surprising, deeply local and gender-aware ways. In this episode, we delve into Ashoka's 5-pillar framework for longevity, their growing network of longevity labs across the global south, and their brand new longevity report on India, a country perceived as young, but with 150 million people already over 60. Maria Clara paints a compelling picture of how countries like India, Brazil, and Zimbabwe are incubating the next wave of aging innovation, community-driven, tech-enabled, and radically inclusive. Welcome, Maria Clara Pinheiro, to Four Quarter Lives. Delighted to have you with us.
I'm so happy to be here, Avivah. Thanks for inviting me.
My great pleasure. And I'd love to start perhaps by you introducing, for those who may not know Ashoka, Maria, could you just give us a brief introduction to the organization and how it identifies and supports social innovators around the world?
Sure, Avivah. So Ashoka is the world's largest association of social entrepreneurs. We were founded in 1981 by someone called Bill Drayton, who is still the CEO of Ashoka. And from back then to now, like what Ashoka does is to look for the people who are coming up with new ideas to solve the biggest problems in society. That goes from education to human rights to health, you name it. But then what we try to do is to find these people in all countries. We have 4,000 social entrepreneurs in 90 countries right now. These are incredible, like social entrepreneurs working to solve like these local problems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a huge and very impressive history. And so I was particularly excited to learn that Ashoka was going to start focusing on longevity. So tell me when they decided to notice this emerging global trend and what signaled to you and the organization that it was a new frontier for social innovation and systems change?
Yeah, so what happens is that Ashoka usually selects about 150 social entrepreneurs every year. And it's interesting because they all come every year, like 150 of them. And then when we start seeing that, there's a particular issue that is coming over and over and over again, we know that there's something emerging there that we should pay attention to, right? So about, I would say 8 years ago, we started noticing more social entrepreneurs who are working to address the demographic shift. They were looking at, solutions that address problems faced by older populations or the aging population. So we started noticing that. So that was when we maybe there's something here that we should pay attention to. So we decided about 4 years ago that we would analyze like 100 of them that were in our network and try to understand what kind of innovations, what kind of solutions they had to address some of these challenges. So we did this very large mapping exercise with 100 Ashoka fellows from all over the world. And then from there, we saw that there are some common patterns, like they are trying to address economic security issues or lifelong learning and work, lifelong health and well-being, intergenerational connection and relationships. So that is when we basically said, okay, I think that there's a very interesting group here that if we work together as a collective, we will be able to accelerate, advance more of like this work globally. So that's when our initiative that is called New Longevity started.
I love this idea of listening to this really bottom-up emergence of global trends. That's, I think, fascinating, and it must have been a really exciting exercise to map them out across so many different initiatives. So you ended up with 5 themes for this longevity work from that mapping exercise. Can you walk us through them and explain a bit how they connect to the vision of lifelong contribution that we spoke about?
Yes. So we, as I mentioned, what we tried to do was to see the big buckets where they were working on, right? Yeah. There was a very large group that were working around changing the narrative, and changing perceptions, changing cultural norms, changing the way we understand aging.
Yeah.
So it was interesting because they were basically focusing on, what can we do to help society see aging and older people differently? So that was a first group.
Yep.
Another one, they were working to address issues connected to lifelong learning and work. And then it was pretty much like, how do we help with reskilling, upskilling, new skills, creating opportunities for works, the gig economy for older people. So, it was a group that was basically looking, how do we make sure that there's an opportunity for people to continue to be active in the workforce and learning throughout life.
Yep.
There's a third one that was around health and care. And then I think that there was a very large number here. And I will share something else soon. But that group was very big because Ashoka also have many, many Ashoka fellows working in the health space.
Right. Yeah.
So what we saw was that many of not only these new fellows that were coming, but some existing fellows who were selected in the past because they were addressing other, health-related issues, they were also starting to look at like aging populations, right? Like because they, in the past, if it was around diabetes or any kind of NCDs, like now there's this growth of the population. So of course, it's some of like these diseases are increasing also, right? So they were addressing this population also. And I think in this cohort, there's also a lot of the Ashoka fellows working on gender issues, and which is directly connected to care. And so that was another big component that we saw. The fourth one was around the intergenerational.
Yeah.
Relationships. And then again, Ashoka also has a lot of work around youth.
Yep.
And then what we observed there, the relationship between young people and older people, and this kind of like mentorship in both ways. Okay, I'm not only talking about older mentoring the young, but the other
reciprocal. Yeah, absolutely.
So we saw that as a very strong, like more of these relationships. And it was interesting because we saw a couple of examples of people working on climate, for instance, and then young people working on climate, they would bring older people to participate and to work with them. And then the fifth one was around economic security and economic inclusion. The key component there was also connected to the fact that, a lot of people in many parts of the world, there's no idea of savings or retirement, right?
Like pensions
pensions, like
infrastructure. Yeah,
exactly. They're inexistent. So, when society was literally dying at the, the age of 50 or 60, that was not an issue. They were leaving these family structures until they died. But the family dynamics is changing very fast. And then we see more women, single women, widowed women for longer. So all that issue is becoming more and more relevant. So there are many Ashoka fellows who are looking at that. So when I was mentioning the health component, that was another thing that happened because I told you that, we mapped these 100 fellows.
Yeah.
And when we started talking about longevity more broadly, Ashoka is, we are now looking at this space. What happened was many other social entrepreneurs who were not part of that group of 100, they started coming to us to say, I'm also working with this group and this is what I'm doing, right? Mm-hmm. So what we realized is that out of this 4,000, we don't have this exact number yet, but, out of this 4,000, many more, when they were elected as Ashoka fellows because of their work in health or human rights, they are now addressing issues that are related to aging population. So the number is much larger than what we were thinking.
That's fabulous.
So now we keep saying that new longevity is the cross-cutting themes for Ashoka. Everybody's is working around that. But another important part was, in these 5 elements that we initially found, when we brought back them to discuss with the community, what we realized was that there was this very common thread, that was around lifelong, what we call lifelong contribution. the reason we came to this was because what we realized was that most of them, what they were doing, it was to help everyone to have the right to contribute throughout life.
Yeah.
And even if you're talking about health, it's like, how do we help people to stay healthier so they can continue to participate for longer?
Yeah.
If we talk about care, it's like, how do we think about systems that support caregivers so they can be healthier and caring for one another for longer, right? Like, so all the...
And stay employed while they're caring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it is, so we realize that this idea of lifelong contribution is exactly what we are envisioning as the new paradigm for longevity. If society creates systems that will allow everyone to contribute throughout life, there are many of the other problems that will be solved, right?
Yeah.
Like, so can we start seeing everyone with this kind of lens, right? And creating opportunities for them to be part of society.
Fantastic. I think it's a wonderfully simple frame. I think one of the challenges with the topic of longevity is it's so broad and so transversal that people get a little overwhelmed with trying to organize it. I was just on a Harvard call yesterday with this exact conversation. So I think your 5 pillars of changing the narrative, the whole issue of work and lifelong learning, health and care, intergenerational relationships, and economic security and inclusion is a beautifully elegant and simple frame for it. What I also like is in your 4,000 fellows, many of whom seem to be already working on this theme, that you get out of what I find to be a bit of an Anglosphere dominance on the topic. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit. What are some of the differences you're seeing in how countries are responding to longevity? You've spanned so many of them. Maybe, I don't know, we spoke a bit about Brazil, India, Spain. What makes these different contexts distinct and so important to these different pillars?
I mean, the local context is different, right? We all know that. Like, starting with where this works, the beginning of the new longevity work was actually with a colleague of ours in South Korea.
Yeah.
So there's a reason she was based there, and there's a reason why she was the one like observing, okay, this is happening, right? Because there, I think there was much
very dramatic in South Korea.
Yeah, exactly. And so the same thing, then we see Europe, and then we see the US, some changes there. Then when it comes to the global South, it's quite fascinating because the conversation was not that strong, even though this is changing now.
Yeah.
But it is like Latin America, for instance, like it's aging very fast. The speed is very fast. And of course, like completely like not prepared for what is about to come.
Yeah, perhaps we can just make a note for listeners generally that's what's so interesting when you take a global look at this, is that different parts of the world are arriving at aging societies at very different speeds, and some are just doing this at hyper speed, while others have had decades and decades to anticipate and prepare.
Yeah, I honestly, in my opinion, is like, I don't think people, even those that are, the societies that are aging faster, like, I don't think that they had prepared that well. I think that the difference that I see is that they have more resources now to address some of the issues. And they also have some frameworks, from, social security or health, like infrastructure and all of that allows them to respond better to some of the challenges that are emerging there, right? So I think that is the main difference. Like, it's just the fact that there are more resources available to then use for some of the challenges that are coming. That is different when you think about like some other parts of the world, right? Like, this change is happening, and there's a lack of resources. The interesting part of where Ashoka comes in is that our social entrepreneurs, they are seeing everyone as lifelong contributors. So what happens is that their approach is, if I am a social entrepreneur, and I think that I want to use one example here, which is Dixon Chibanda, the founder of Friendship Bench in Zimbabwe.
Yep.
So Friendship Bench is this organization that So Dixon is a psychiatrist, and he was working in the mental health space for a long time, and just seeing that, there's a huge challenge. I don't remember exact the number, but it's, when he started, there were like, I think it's like 18 psychiatrists in the country, right? So it's like crazy numbers. It's impossible to imagine that you, in a country that has a very small number of psychiatrists, will address the problem of mental health that is just growing everywhere. What he thought was, what is there in every single community that we can use in a good way to address this challenge? And what he realizes that grandmothers are everywhere in Zimbabwe. So he began Friendship Bench as like this organization that trains grandmothers and mental health counselors. So they literally sit on a bench, and that is the place where they offer the counseling. So incredible work.
I perhaps just explain that a little bit more. So a grandmother who's been trained by the Ashoka fellow in Zimbabwe sits on a bench and invites anybody, but especially I think young people, right, to come and be listened to, get some support and advice from somebody a few decades older.
Yes.
Wonderful program. Very inspiring.
Yeah. And what I think, of course, that he's very particular about how these grandmothers are trained, but he also knows that there's the quality of being a grandmother, an older person, and the ability to listen, to be empathetic, to just stay present when someone is telling a story or sharing a challenge, right? There is something that happens there when you sit and when you look at someone that, that is very, very unique. So he is very particular about that, because he says that's the secret of this. But this can be done anywhere where you have people who can play this role and sit on a bench and talk to someone. So he's now spreading very fast, like in different parts of the world, so that is going really well. But the reason I brought this example is that Dixon is someone who sees an older person as an active contributor to society. It is looking at someone who is there and can play a role that other people are not playing. So the social and economic value of this is it's enormous, right? So at Ashoka, this is what we have. We have a network of 4,000 people who are seeing everyone that they work with as contributors to society. We call them changemakers. So if we are tapping into that, that force, there are no problems that cannot be solved, right? So the reason I'm saying this is that if I think about a country like India, where I'm based, you don't have infrastructure, you have many challenges, but you have many other people too. So can we start seeing them as people who can help solve the problems that we have? So that's where we are. So what happens when we see these 4,000 social entrepreneurs and all the differences between the countries? There are some cultural differences. There are some issues like if in India it's going to be more around gender, in Brazil could be more about mental health, in Spain could be more around social isolation. We can see that there's some of the challenges are stronger in certain parts of the world, but the way that we are solving for them are very similar, so there's potential anyway to change things everywhere.
Well, I think it's such a huge part of your first pillar of changing the narrative, just labeling the notion of lifelong contribution and seeing everybody as changemakers, I think is the beginning of the shift. And if you do it and then spread it, and I think that grandmother example is just such a perfect model of that. And now there's more and more research about the grandmother effect and just how potent these older women are on future generations. So you have set up a series of longevity labs. So tell us about that. What are they? How do they work? And what kind of impact are they aiming for more specifically?
So when we began, we were working more at a global level and looking at everything globally, and we are still doing that. We are looking for social innovations everywhere. We are helping the social entrepreneurs to scale, to take their ideas to other parts of the world. So we still do many things at the global level. At the same time, what we saw is that, there are some unique elements in a particular country, right, that we as society, we also want to address. So what we decided to do, and it was very interesting because this idea came when we were in a conversation with a partner, our first partner in Brazil. It's a philanthropic organization, and the founder is called Instituto Beja, and the founder, Cris, when she was talking to us, like she basically said, so if we want to experiment like with many, many things, why not creating a lab? We were discussing like, how do we launch in a country and what do we do?
Yep.
So with her organization, we built the first lab, and we ended up like bringing more people. So Brazil was the first country where we built this. And I'm talking about like a year and a half. So it's very early, but it's growing fast.
Yep.
So then we start bringing universities, companies, you name it, like just different stakeholders who are looking at the challenge and who want to work together to address some of the challenges collectively. And so what we are doing through these labs is just seeing what are the main challenges that we have in Brazil or in India, and how can this network collaborate and work together to advance this faster? If it's around like new policies for the workforce, right? Like, or having more companies signing for age-friendly employers and so on, or having universities to create friendly universities. In Brazil, for instance, there's the National Policy on Care that was just created in December. So we have many of the social entrepreneurs collaborating to see what do we have to do there? How do we bring this national policy to be implemented? What does that mean? So we are bringing different stakeholders together to collaborate and advance this field faster. So we started this in Brazil, then we launched it in Indonesia, then in Spain, and now we are in the process of launching this in India this year.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about India, because it's so big and so impactful and growing old so fast. So India seems and is seen, I think, perceived as being incredibly young, but it's increasingly old. What are some of the hidden or overlooked aspects of aging in India that you're uncovering as you build your lab there?
Yeah, that was very funny because, I live in India, right? Like I'm Brazilian, but I live in India.
Where are you based?
Yeah, so I'm Brazilian, but I'm based in India. So I've been living here for a couple of years, and all we talk about here is youth, right? Or it's a young country. It's a young country as it's technology and youth.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we were not thinking so much about India until last year, the beginning of last year. But then, in the beginning of last year, as I was meeting like people, the Ashoka fellows and whenever you talk to someone, who works with volunteers, who works with caregivers, they're all 60 plus, like, most of them. And then I was just like, we are talking about this youth country, but there's an army here of these 60 plus people who are running the show, right? Like,
how many are there? There are hundreds of millions of overseas.
Yeah, now today is 150 million.
Yeah.
And I love Indian numbers, right? Like, because I keep saying by 2050 it's going to be 300 million. This is bigger than Brazil, the whole population of Brazil. So I think that India, they say, it's the minority, but the minority is like 150 million.
Exactly. So it makes it a perfect place for a longevity lab.
Yeah, exactly. So what we decided to do was because we didn't know exactly what was happening here. So we partnered with a philanthropic organization, Rohini Nilekani, Philanthropies Endowberg. And then we conducted this study. And it was an incredible process because we had a few learning circles also as we were doing research, where we invited many organizations from all sectors, social, private and public sectors, to come and discuss with us what is happening in India. What is the scene here, right? Like what is working, what is not working. So anyway, we learned a lot. There's a full report available online that has some of like this incredible data and also insights from this community. But I think that there are four main...
Give us the main takeaways, and we'll make sure to include the link to that report in the show notes for anybody who's in.
Yeah, so the four big buckets that we saw, and it was quite similar to the others that we saw globally, but it had some differences. The first thing that we saw was around economic security, right? And And this thing that, longevity without income is vulnerability, right? Like that is, is clear. So because there's no post-retirement income, most of the people rely on being taken care by their families, which is changing very fast. There's no concept like, the concept of savings is quite new, no pensions, all of that. There's a huge issue there. Yeah. So it was one of the main things that we saw. And then, of course, women are very vulnerable here. Like you have in India, 54% of the women over 60 are widowed. So this, is a very large number. And we have to keep in mind that you're talking about 54% that probably doesn't have income, right? And so that is it's a very...
Who become incredibly dependent on families, children who may not like this kind of struggle.
Yeah, which is, it's interesting because this support system in India is quite beautiful, and it's been there for a long time, of families caring for one another. But we do see that this is changing quite fast, with more nuclear families. And there's some stress there. There are certain things that need to be addressed.
And fewer children. The demographic pyramid is shifting there. So they're also dependent on far less children than they would have been in the past.
Sure. Yeah. The other thing that we saw was around health and well-being, like with this, idea that living longer doesn't mean living healthier. And India is a good example. India has very large numbers. It's one of the countries where people with diabetes are the youngest. Like, so you're talking about people in their 30s, getting diabetes, and in large numbers. So, and what happens is that, again, if they were dying at 50, that was one thing, but now they are living longer. So the complications of this are very, very high. And you do not have systems, right? You just don't have health systems to accommodate what's about to come. So, and it's the same thing for care. Like, it's very interesting because India, 30% of the healthcare professionals, nurses, and mostly of the healthcare, they move abroad. They leave India.
Wow.
And it's interesting because many of them are trained as healthcare professionals to work as caregivers somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. In another country, usually in Europe or in the US. So there's a huge conversation around like what's going to happen in the years to come, because even the health professionals we don't have enough. So what do we need to do, to increase this number here? So that was another bucket on health and care. The third one was around social connectedness, and loneliness is becoming an epidemic here as well. Yeah. And, of course, what I said, the nuclear families, like, people leaving, moving to cities, and then you have just the different dynamics, digital access, all of this is just increasing loneliness quite fast. And we can see that, like, especially with the older population, feeling more and more lonely. You also have in India, because there's a very large number of people who move abroad and the parents stayed behind. So then there's the dynamics that we are seeing is that more senior living spaces being created. There are more conversations around that because older people are getting lonely here.
Yeah.
The fourth thing that we saw was around what we call the freedom to participate, which is very connected to this idea of lifelong contribution. That is a myth to think that that you have to stop at 60. And this is also, and it's funny because, as I said in the beginning, like everyone is volunteering, working and contributing. So it's already there. I think that the difference that I see is not seen as is not paid jobs, right? Like exactly. it's not organized.
Yeah.
So I think that is one of the things that I know that you spoke with Neeraj, and Wisdom Circle is one of the organizations, trying to address this. Like, how can we help, this contribution of older people to be valued, recognized, and also paid? These were the 4 areas that we found, and some interesting insights that are quite unique, I think, in India, right? Like, one is around gender. I think all the women in India, like, there's so many nuances here that we...
absolutely. Give us a little bit of a deep dive on the gender issue, because women's roles are fast changing as well, which has a huge impact on everything you've just said.
Yeah, I think that, because of the family dynamic, joint families, and, and these structures where there's a lot of community care, family care, it's been there for a long time. So, but what happened is that, the number that we found was like 49% of working women who are caregivers, they have to reduce the hours because of the caregiving, right? So we are talking 50, it's almost half of the women who are working, and when they are caregivers, so then have to reduce the hours. And there's I think 13% that have to leave the jobs completely. And when you look at only that, in the last 20 years, India has been making a lot of progress in terms of women's participation, women's inclusion. So I think that the big question that we have is that if we do not address this issue now, this number of caregivers, because they are caring for the kids and for the older parents, is just going to keep increasing more and more. And then the numbers that I just gave, they will increase also. So there's a conversation around, all the things, there were big wins for women in the last few years. There's a chance they're just going to lose it, because
absolutely.
And then as we talked in the beginning, you do not have systems in place like you have in the global north that will help women to, that will help either in terms of policies or care support. They do not exist here. So then that's another reason why we have to be, more social protection, right? We don't have the same mechanism that you have in the global north. So then there's no financial agency or things like that. But then, on the other hand, I think that what we also learned is that, India, because it is a country that for so many years, when you think about the self-help groups, and how these platforms for community care always exist, intergenerational relationships and learning were always there. There's a huge potential. If you look at this from a positive angle and you tap into this and say, okay, let's help develop this further, there's a lot of potential in kind of creating things that will work for everyone. And I think that another thing that I see that in India is very unique is two things. One is it is a country where everything works through networks. And it is very different from any other place. you suddenly you are in a conversation and then there are 10 different people who are part of other 3 different networks, and suddenly you are co-creating with them and you're driving things in networks. And I'm saying because this is happening to me as we speak, the conversations that we are having here, there's no Ashoka or Ashoka fellows, it's massive networks who want to work together and drive change. So I'm seeing this in a very, very positive way. And then on top of that, you have all the technology infrastructure, right? All this idea of digital public infrastructure.
I was gonna ask about that. What's the partnership with the age tech innovators, and how does that sort of answer to the positive side of kind of a whole new longevity economy of tech for aging?
Yeah, so there's a very vibrant age tech ecosystem in India. And
absolutely,
with many startups that are looking at different products and services and creating for that, of course, much cheaper costs. So I think that all the things that we saw in the past on financial products that I think or other tech products that India came up with, we are seeing the same energy in the aging space. So I think in the coming years, we will probably see a lot of things coming from here, cheaper and designed for millions.
And designed for scale. So, absolutely. Yeah. That's the Indian sauce.
Yes. So then
that's what I wanted to end on, is about tools, networks, and building for the future. You're about to launch something called the Longevity Brain Platform. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is something that we designed with a partner here called Avivah AI, and it's a global platform, not only for India. So we are launching next week. The way we started first is a kind of a brain with knowledge from all over the world on everything that is connected to longevity. It could be seen almost as a kind of chat GPT for longevity, but with a special trick that I would say that we created this really well, trying to bring the insights from innovation, social innovations that can be applied in policies and so on. So it's a brain that is just growing with all the networks that we have, in terms of more content and insights and models and ideas. But what this brain will also allow us to do is to conduct many surveys with older people directly. And this comes through the brain. So it will be a very good way for us to learn from the community itself, the people who are aging, how they are aging, having insights from individuals on the ground that can inform this brain. And this brain can then inform, innovations and policies and so on. So that will be a fun thing for everyone to look at.
And who has access? Can listeners tap into this?
Yes, yes. People will be able to just access with Gmail or LinkedIn. So it's going to be open and free.
Fantastic. Okay, check the show notes for the access links. We'll make sure to include that. And maybe a note, because what will be interesting about this longevity brain is it'll be very global and cross-cultural. And I'm wondering if you might comment, do you agree with me that it's important to move beyond a very Anglo-Saxon lens on aging, very developed North kind of lens dominates a little bit the airwaves?
For sure. Well, that is the goal. So we have 2/3 of the knowledge inside this brain comes from the global South.
Yeah.
We are very particular about that because we also see that, there's a lot of innovation that is designed, created, and disseminated with very low cost and very community-centered.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot that the world can learn from, the friendship bench is a very good example. There's so many conversations around mental health and trying to solve for mental health with so many things. And I keep asking myself, probably the best is to sit with a grandmother, right?
It's so simple, so cheap, so obvious. Yeah, it's too simple, I think.
So I think
the investors excited.
Yeah, like Friendship Bench, there are many, many innovations, and these innovations are also starting to, tap into technology, to get better, get to more people. So we want that to be driving a lot of the conversation in the longevity space, and this is very, very important for us. And so
fantastic.
I think
So, Maria, we're going to close with a question of what's next. Where do you hope all of this extraordinary energy and innovation and tapping all this extraordinary social innovators globally, where are you headed? What do you think the next 5 or 10 years are going to look like, both for Ashoka and maybe the broader field of longevity?
Our main vision here is to make this new paradigm a reality, right? And I think that for everyone who is in the longevity space, people have different ideas of what they want, in terms of health or work. I think that for us is this not an idea, but is this realization that everyone is a contributor to society, regardless of age.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is what we want. And we want more people, organizations, institutions to recognize and to design systems for that. So what we want is whoever is interested in making this happen, is to join us in this, through these labs, in this movement that we are part of. We are not, it's not an Ashoka thing. I think it's it is a movement, it is a collective, and they're all the collaborators that we have, and we will continue to grow this community. But I think it's, what is bringing this community together is this idea of can we design systems for lifelong contribution and participation? This is what we want. Yeah. So I hope we can get more people to join us.
It's a wonderful reframe too about a lot of the conversation here in the North is about finding your purpose and a very individual pursuit. What I love is this really macro global view of everybody can be a contributor at every age, and we need to make sure that systems are designed for it. Maria, thank you for all your work, all your vision. It was a real joy having you with us. I'm sure you've inspired many.
No, thank you. This was such a good conversation. Thank you so much for having me and us.
We will stay in touch and track everything you're doing. And listeners, join a lab, a longevity lab near you. That'll be how we can follow. Maria, until very soon, I think.
Yes. Thank you so much, Avivah.
My great pleasure. See you soon.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.